Guilt is eating you alive. You carry it absolutely everywhere, not loudly, not in a way that anyone around you would necessarily notice. You've gotten very good at moving through your days with it strapped to you, at laughing when something is funny, at showing up when you're supposed to show up, at being present enough that nobody asks the question you're most afraid of being asked. But it's there. It's always there, underneath everything, in the quiet moments, in the space between one thing and the next, in the 2 a.m. when the distractions run out and there's nothing left between you and the thing you did, or didn't do, or should have done differently. It's been there so long you've almost stopped noticing it. The way you notice other pain, it's just part of the texture of your days now. Part of who you are. A permanent low-grade weight that you've stopped expecting to lift because it's been so long since you felt what it was like without it. That's what I want to talk about. Not guilt as a passing emotion, not the kind that arrives briefly when you make a small mistake and then dissipates. The other kind, the kind that has moved in, the kind that has taken up residence in you and started making decisions about your life without asking your permission, the kind that is quietly eating you alive. Let me start with what guilt actually is, because I think most people who are living inside it haven't fully examined what it's doing there, what it's supposed to be doing, and why it stayed so much longer than it was meant to. Guilt, at its most functional, is information. It's your moral system telling you that something you did or didn't do conflicted with your values, that you caused harm, that something needs to be addressed, an apology, a change, an acknowledgement of what happened. Guilt in this form is useful. It's the thing that makes you a person who learns and grows and takes responsibility, rather than just moving through the world indifferent to your impact on it. That version of guilt has a lifespan. You feel it, you understand what it's pointing at, you do what you can to address it, and then it passes. Not always cleanly, not always quickly, but it passes. It does its job and moves on. But that's not the guilt I'm talking about. The guilt you're carrying, the one that's been there for months, maybe years. That guilt has stopped doing its job and started doing something else entirely. It's no longer pointing at something that can be addressed. It's no longer directing you toward action, it's just sitting in you, heavy and permanent and completely resistant to anything you try to do with it. And you've tried things, you've apologized, or you've thought about what happened so many times you could replay every second, or you've punished yourself in ways both visible and invisible, held back from good things, stayed smaller than you needed to be, decided somewhere underneath everything that you didn't deserve the thing you wanted because of the thing you did. And the guilt is still there, unchanged, like nothing you've done has made a dent in it. Because this kind of guilt isn't about the event anymore. It's about something it got attached to on the way in. Something deeper and older and more resistant than the specific thing you're blaming yourself for. Here's what it looks like from the inside. The daily texture of it, it looks like an inability to fully enjoy good things. You're somewhere good, something is going right, someone is being kind to you, life has produced a moment that should feel light, and there's this quiet undertow. This thing that pulls at the corner of the experience, that says you don't quite deserve to be here. That reminds you at the exact moment you should be present of the reasons you shouldn't be comfortable. It looks like self-sabotage that doesn't make sense on the surface. You get close to something good, a relationship, an opportunity, a version of your life that looks like what you wanted, and something in you finds a way to complicate it, pulls back, creates distance, manufactures a reason it won't work, and you don't fully understand why you keep doing it until you sit with it long enough to find the guilt underneath. The belief that you haven't earned this, that the good thing coming your way is somehow undeserved given the thing you're still holding against yourself. It looks like relationships where you give more than is sustainable, where you overextend, overgive, make yourself endlessly available, not from abundance but from a quiet belief that you owe something, that the way to balance the scales of what you did is to be useful enough, present enough, self-sacrificing enough, that maybe if you give enough you'll eventually work off the debt. The debt never gets worked off, and guilt doesn't operate on a payment system. You can give endlessly and wake up the next day carrying exactly the same weight. It looks like apologizing constantly, not just for the thing, but for everything, for taking up space, for having needs, for being in the room. A kind of reflexive, compulsive apology that has become so automatic you barely notice you're doing it anymore, as if every moment of existence requires a justification, a preemptive acknowledgement that you know you're in imposition. That's not humility. That's guilt that has spread beyond its original location and started infecting everything. I want to talk about the specific guilt that comes from relationships, because I think this is where most people are carrying the heaviest load, and I think it's the variety that's hardest to put down. The guilt of how you treated someone, of the ways you were less than what they deserved, not in a catastrophic way maybe, but in the accumulated small ways that you can see clearly now that you have distance. The things you said, the ways you checked out, the moments you were selfish or careless or just not paying enough attention, the version of yourself you were in that relationship that you're not proud of, or the guilt of leaving, of being the one who ended it, even when ending it was right, even when staying would have been worse for both of you, even when, on every rational level, you know the relationship had run its course, the guilt of having hurt someone who loved you, regardless of whether staying would have been the right answer, or the guilt of not leaving sooner, of staying in something that wasn't working and in doing so prolonging something painful for both of you, of all the months or years where you knew and didn't act on the knowing, or the guilt of moving on, of finding that life continued after the ending, of laughing again, feeling something again, wanting again, and feeling like that forward motion is somehow a betrayal of the weight the other person is still carrying. And all of those are real. All of them make sense. All of them point to a person who has a conscience, who cares about their impact, who takes seriously the harm that can come from loving someone imperfectly. But here's what I need you to hear about all of them. Being imperfect in a relationship is not a crime that requires a life sentence. That's the thing about guilt that stays too long. It stops being proportional. It stops being calibrated to the actual severity of what happened. It just becomes a verdict, permanent, final, self-imposed, that you carry regardless of what you've done to address it, regardless of how much time has passed, regardless of whether the person you hurt has long since moved on while you're still in the same courtroom, convicting yourself. You become both the defendant and the judge. And the judge in you is relentless, shows no mercy, accepts no time served, finds you guilty every time, for everything, on a loop. And the defendant, the actual you, the human one who made mistakes, because humans make mistakes, and that is the entire history of every person who has ever lived. That person never gets a fair hearing, never gets to present context, never gets to say, I was going through something, I didn't know better then, I have learned, I have changed, I am not the same person who did that thing. The guilt doesn't want to hear it. The guilt has already decided. Let me talk about the people who weaponized your conscience. Because for some of the people reading this, the guilt isn't entirely self-generated. Some of it was put there by someone else, deliberately or not, and has been living in you ever since. Some people are very good at making you feel responsible for things that weren't yours to carry. They have a way of framing events that consistently places the weight on you, of responding to your attempts to have needs or limits or independent thoughts with a reaction that makes you feel like you've done something terrible, of making their pain that may be real, pain that may even be connected to your actions, into something that requires your permanent guilt as a form of payment. And if you're someone who already has a sensitive conscience, who already tends toward taking responsibility, who already struggles to distinguish between being accountable and being a punching bag for someone else's unprocessed emotions, that kind of person can fill you up with guilt that isn't yours in ways that feel completely legitimate, because it arrived through your own sense of responsibility, because your own moral system processed it as real. But not all guilt is earned. Some of it is assigned. And the guilt that was assigned to you by the person who needed you to feel bad in order for them to feel okay, by the situation that made you the convenient carrier of something that had many contributors, by the version of events that left out the context that would have made your role make more sense. That guilt is not a debt you owe. It's a weight you were given that you never had to keep. Here is what happens when you carry guilt too long. The specific measurable damage it does over time. You get smaller, not physically, in the way you occupy your life. The guilt slowly narrows what you feel you're allowed to want, to have, to pursue. You stop reaching for things not because they're unavailable, but because some part of you has decided that reaching is something other people get to do. People who haven't done what you've done. People who haven't failed the way you failed. You contract around the guilt, and the life available to you gets smaller and smaller without anyone doing it to you from the outside. You attract more guilt. This is the painful irony of it, because when you carry the sense that you fundamentally owe something, that you are at your core someone who causes harm and needs to compensate for it, you will find situations and people that confirm that belief. You will overextend until you inevitably disappoint someone. You will stay in things too long out of obligation and then leave badly. You will repeat the patterns that produce the guilt because the patterns were a symptom of something that the guilt alone is not addressing. Guilt doesn't heal the wound, it just keeps your attention on it. You lose the ability to forgive anyone else because the standard you hold yourself to, the relentless, unforgiving, no context standard of the internal judge, gets applied outward too. If you can't let yourself off the hook for being human, you can't fully let anyone else off either. The guilt makes you rigid, makes you less able to hold complexity in other people's behavior, makes forgiveness, in general, feel like weakness or naivety rather than wisdom. So how do you put it down, or at least how do you start to? Because I'm not going to pretend it's simple. Guilt that's been living in you for years doesn't dissolve from one conversation, but I do think there are true things worth saying about the direction. The first is, accountability and guilt are not the same thing. Accountability is active. It looks at what happened, owns the real part that's yours, makes amends where possible, and then uses that understanding to become someone who doesn't repeat it. It has an endpoint. It moves. Guilt is passive. It sits. It returns. It doesn't move toward anything. It doesn't make you better. It just makes you feel worse. And feeling worse is not the same as doing better. You can feel terrible about something forever and still do the exact same thing again, because the guilt was never actually teaching you anything. It was just punishing you. Real accountability changes behavior. Guilt changes nothing. It just hurts. The second is, you have to actually grieve what happened, not replay it. Grieve it. Feel the real sadness of it. The sadness of having hurt someone, of having been hurt, of having been the imperfect version of yourself in a moment that mattered. Let it be sad. Really sad. The guilt has been a way of staying in something that needs to be fully felt and then fully in the past. Grieving it properly is what lets it become the past instead of the permanent present. The third is, you have to be willing to believe that you are not the worst thing you've ever done. That the mistake, whatever it was, however real, however consequential, is a data point in a life that contains thousands of data points. That you are more than it. That the people who know you and love you are not idiots for doing so. That they are seeing something real, and that their version of you is at least as accurate as the guilt's version. The guilt has had too much say for too long. It's time to let some other voices in. You are not what the guilt says you are. I know you've been living inside its verdict for a long time. I know it feels true in the way things feel true when they've been repeated enough. I know the case it makes against you is detailed and specific and hard to argue with because it uses your own memory as evidence. But the guilt is not an objective judge. It's a scared, wounded part of you that latched onto the worst moment and decided that moment was the whole story. And the whole story is longer than that, messier than that, more human than that. You have caused harm, probably, most people have. And you have also been harmed. And you have also loved imperfectly and been loved imperfectly and tried and failed and tried again in the very human, very ordinary way that people do. That is the whole story, not just the worst chapter. The guilt only reads one chapter. It reads it on a loop, and it has convinced you that loop is your life. It isn't. Your life is bigger than what you did wrong. You are bigger than what you did wrong. Put it down, not because it doesn't matter, because carrying it forever is not the same as making it right. And you've been carrying it long enough. It's time to let yourself be more than this. I don't think I noticed when it changed. That's the thing about this particular kind of loss. It doesn't arrive with a timestamp. There's no moment you can point to and say, there, that's where it shifted. It's more like you wake up one day and reach for something that used to be warm and find that it's just room temperature now. And you try to remember when it cooled and you can't. You weren't watching, you were inside it, you were living your life. And now you're standing in the middle of something that looks exactly like what you had before and feels completely different. And you don't know what to do with that because nothing technically happened. Nothing broke. Nothing ended. It just changed. Quietly, without asking your permission, without giving you any warning at all. That's what I want to talk about. Not the dramatic end of love, not the betrayal or the blow up or the relationship that crashes and burns in a way you can at least narrate. The other thing, the slower thing. The thing where love just becomes something else, something you recognize but can't quite feel the same way anymore. There's a specific version of the beginning of love that I think we spend a long time chasing without realizing that's what we're doing. You know the one, where everything about the other person is interesting, where you want to know every single thing about them, not because you're trying to assess them as a partner, not because you're running through a checklist, but because the information itself is fascinating, because it's them. Because every detail adds to this picture you're building and the picture keeps getting better, where you think about them in between seeing them, not anxiously, not the worried, overthinking kind of thinking, just the warm kind, the kind where they drift into your head while you're doing something else and it makes whatever you're doing a little lighter, where physical closeness feels like relief, where being in the same room as them is just better than being in a room without them, where you reach for them automatically without thinking, because reaching for them is just what your body does now. I'm not being naive about it. I know that phase doesn't last forever. I know it's not meant to. I know that what comes after it, the familiarity, the depth, the specific comfort of being truly known over time, is supposed to be richer, more real, more sustainable. I know all of that. But I also think something important lives in that early feeling that can get lost in the transition. And when it gets lost, when you notice it's gone and you can't find where you left it, it's one of the more disorienting experiences a person can have. Because you still love them. You're sure of that. You're almost certain. But the love feels different now, and you don't know if different means deeper, or if different means diminished, or if different means something is wrong, or if this is just what love becomes, and you're supposed to be fine with it, and you don't want to say that out loud. Because saying it out loud makes it real. Because saying it out loud means you might have to do something about it. Because saying it out loud to the person you love means watching their face change in a way you can't take back. So you keep it in, and you try to figure out if what you're feeling is a truth or just a season. Let me try to describe what it actually feels like, the texture of it, because I think the experience is specific enough that it deserves specificity. It feels like going through the motions of something you used to do naturally, like the actions are all the same, the morning texts, the inside jokes, the way you find each other at the end of the day, but they're running on memory now instead of impulse. You're doing them because you've always done them. Because they're part of the structure of this, because stopping would mean something. It feels like looking at photographs from a year ago and being genuinely moved by them, by what you see in both of your faces, by the obvious realness of what was there. And then looking up from the photographs and trying to locate that same thing in the room you're currently in, and finding something quieter, something steadier, but not the same thing. It feels like effort where there wasn't effort before. Not bad effort, not the effort of fighting or managing or holding something damaged together, just the low-grade effort of being engaged, of being present, of generating warmth rather than just feeling it. And you wonder, is this normal? Is this what they mean when they say love is a choice? Is this what mature love actually looks like, and I've just been comparing it to the beginning, which is an unfair comparison which everyone says you shouldn't make? Or is this something else? Is this the feeling of something that's quietly been running out? Here's what I think happens, and I want to be careful here because I'm not sure I have it fully figured out. I think love changes for a lot of reasons, and not all of them are bad. Time changes it. Comfort changes it. The way two people settle into each other changes it. The urgency softens, the novelty fades, the constant low-level electricity of early love, which is genuinely not sustainable and would burn you out, becomes something calmer. That's not death, that's development. That's the thing actually taking root instead of just flowering. But I also think love can change because something went unaddressed, because two people drifted in a direction nobody named, because small resentments accumulated without being resolved, because one person changed and the other person didn't fully notice, or noticed and didn't know how to talk about it. Because the communication that would have kept things close got replaced by the comfort that assumes closeness without checking. And those two things, natural development and quiet erosion, can feel almost identical from the inside, which is why it's so hard to know what you're dealing with. Which is why people stay in things that have quietly stopped working for years, and also why people leave things that only needed a conversation. The feeling of distance doesn't tell you its own cause. You have to do that work yourself. I want to talk about the loneliness that lives inside this because I think it's one of the loneliest experiences there is, and it almost never gets named. You are with someone, you love them, you are committed to this, to them, to the life you've built together, and you are lonely. Not always, not completely, but in a real and specific way that you don't know how to explain to anyone, including them. You are lonely for the version of this that used to exist, for the version of them you fell in love with, which is not gone exactly, just harder to access. For the version of yourself that existed inside that early love, that felt so lit up by another person, that moved through the world with this specific lightness that came from being fully, recently chosen. You miss a feeling that technically hasn't ended. You grieve something that is still here, and you can't say that. Because if you say that to the person you're with, what you're saying is, I love you, but being with you used to feel better than this. And that is true and real and doesn't make you a bad person, but it will land like a wound, and you know it. So you carry it. You try to generate the feeling through action, through dates and gestures, and recreating the conditions of the early thing as if the early thing was a recipe you could follow. Sometimes that works for a night. Sometimes you catch a glimpse of it and it's enough to keep you going. Sometimes it doesn't work and you sit across from someone you've loved for years, feeling further away than the distance between your chairs. There are things that change love that we don't talk about honestly enough. Disappointment changes it. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The accumulated weight of small moments where they weren't who you needed them to be. The times you needed them to show up and they didn't. the conversations you tried to have that went nowhere, the ways they've let you see them clearly, and some of what you've seen has been harder to love than you expected. You still love them, but loving someone and being disappointed by them at the same time takes up space. And if the disappointment never gets addressed, if it just gets filed away, handled, moved past without really being resolved, it builds up somewhere, and it changes the texture of the love, makes it a little heavier to carry. Boredom changes it too, and I know that's uncomfortable to say, but I think it's true. Not boredom with the person necessarily, boredom with the shape of things, with the predictability, with knowing exactly how most conversations are going to go, how most evenings are going to end, what they're going to say about any given topic before they say it. That predictability is also comfort. It's also safety. It's also the thing people mean when they say they want a partner, and not just a feeling. But it can quietly drain something from the experience of being together if nobody tends to it, if you let the routine become the whole thing. And then there's change itself. People change. You've changed. They've changed. And sometimes two people change in directions that continue to align, and sometimes they change in directions that quietly diverge. And if you're not paying attention, if you're assuming alignment because that's how it used to be, you can find yourself standing next to someone who is genuinely different from the person you fell in love with without either of you having done anything wrong. I want to say something about the guilt, because I think people who feel this carry a disproportionate amount of guilt for something that isn't a moral failing. You didn't choose for love to feel different. You didn't decide one morning to care less, to feel less, to be less moved by the person you've committed yourself to. It didn't happen because you weren't trying hard enough or grateful enough or mature enough. Feelings don't work like that. You cannot effort your way into an emotion. You cannot guilt yourself into warmth. And yet most people who feel this spend enormous energy blaming themselves for it, telling themselves they're selfish, telling themselves a better person would just appreciate what they have, telling themselves that if they were more emotionally disciplined, more grateful, more adult about the whole thing, they wouldn't be standing here wondering where the feeling went. That's not fair. And it's also not useful. The guilt doesn't bring the feeling back. It just adds a layer of shame on top of an already uncomfortable truth. And shame makes you less likely to address the thing directly, because addressing it means admitting it, and admitting it means facing the shame you've been trying to outrun. So you end up in this place where you feel something true, feel guilty for feeling it, can't address it because the guilt is in the way, and the thing just continues. Let the guilt go. Or at least set it down long enough to look at what's underneath it. Because underneath it is just a person who loves someone and is trying to understand why something that used to feel one way feels different now. That's not a character flaw. That's just being human in a long relationship with another human who's also changing all the time. You're allowed to feel this and still be a good person. You're allowed to name this and still love them. You're allowed to be confused and uncertain and a little sad about the distance between now and then, without it meaning that everything is over. Give yourself that much. You've been carrying this long enough without that. So what do? I don't think there's a clean answer to that. I think it depends on what you're actually dealing with. Whether this is natural development or quiet erosion, whether the love has changed or the relationship has stopped tending the love, whether you've grown apart or just stopped checking in. But I do think the first thing is naming it. Saying it somewhere, even if just to yourself first. Not dramatizing it, not catastrophizing it, just being honest about what you feel. Love feels different now. I don't know what that means yet, but it's true, and I'm not going to keep pretending it isn't, because the pretending is what makes it worse. The pretending is what lets the slow erosion continue unchecked. The pretending is how two people who once loved each other deeply and fully end up feeling like strangers sharing a space, both of them grieving something neither of them ever named. You owe it to yourself and to them to name it. Not as an accusation, not as a verdict, just as information. As a real and honest thing that's happening inside you that the relationship deserves to know about. Because sometimes naming it is what brings it back. Sometimes the conversation you've been afraid to have is the thing that opens a door you thought had closed. Sometimes love that has quieted down is not love that has ended. It's love that stopped being tended and just needs someone to tend it again. And sometimes you name it and you find out that you've both been feeling it. That you've both been carrying this private grief about what used to exist. And somehow impossibly that shared grief becomes the beginning of something closer than what you had before. Because you're finally actually in it together instead of separately managing the loss of it. That happens, it really does. But also, And I want to say this gently but clearly. Sometimes love changing is love telling you something true. Sometimes the feeling shifted because the fit was never quite right, and the early love was too loud to let you hear that. Sometimes you've grown into a person who needs something different from what this can give. Sometimes the relationship has run the length of what it was, and holding on past that point isn't loyalty. It's just fear of the loss, and that's a hard thing to know, and a harder thing to act on. And I'm not telling you what to do with it. I'm just saying the feeling is information. It's not a betrayal, and it's not a failure, and it doesn't make you a bad person or an ungrateful one. It's just honest. The most honest thing your heart knows how to do is feel what it actually feels. And if what it feels is that something has changed, then something has changed. The question is whether what's changed is a beginning or an ending. Only you know that. But you have to be willing to actually look. Love doesn't feel the same anymore. That sentence can mean a lot of different things. It can mean it deepened. It can mean it drifted. It can mean you stopped tending it. It can mean you grew. It can mean you grew apart. But it always means the same first thing. It means you're paying attention. It means you care enough to notice. It means you haven't gone numb or given up or stopped trying to understand what's happening inside you. That matters. Paying attention is actually the beginning of everything. Whatever this is, whatever the love becoming different actually means for you, at least you're not looking away. At least you're still asking the question. That's where everything worth having starts. Overthinking is killing you, not literally, but close enough that the word fits, because what overthinking actually does, what it does to your sleep, your relationships, your ability to just exist in a moment without immediately analyzing it to death, is a slow, quiet kind of damage. The kind that doesn't show up on anything. The kind nobody around you can see. The kind you can't even fully explain to someone who doesn't live inside it. You just know that your brain never stops, that there is no off switch, that the moment something happens, something good, something bad, something completely neutral, a part of you immediately picks it up and starts turning it over, looking for meaning, looking for threat, looking for the thing underneath the thing, and you're exhausted, not from your life, from your own head. That's what I want to talk about, not in an abstract way, in the specific, honest, this is actually what it does to you way that I think most people who overthink have never had fully named for them. Let me start with what it actually costs you, because I think we talk about overthinking like it's a personality quirk, like it's just how some people are wired and it's fine, it's manageable. Drink some chamomile tea and journal about it. It's not fine. It's costing you real things. It's costing you your present. Every moment you spend living inside a conversation that already happened or a scenario that hasn't happened yet is a moment you are not actually in your life. Not in the room, not with the people in front of you, not feeling what there is to feel right now. You're somewhere else in the past replaying something you can't change, or in the future preparing for something that might never arrive. And the present just keeps passing, quietly, without you in it. It's costing you your relationships because overthinking doesn't stay internal. It bleeds out. It changes how you communicate. You either over-explain because your brain has run every possible misinterpretation and you're trying to preempt all of them, or you go completely quiet because saying anything feels like opening a door you won't be able to close. It makes you pull back at exactly the moments you should be moving closer. It makes you read distance into things that aren't distant and miss the actual warning signs because you're too busy analyzing the fake ones. It's costing you your confidence. Every decision that should be simple becomes a referendum on your judgment. Every choice carries the weight of all the ways it could go wrong. And over time, all that second guessing teaches you that you can't be trusted, that your instincts are unreliable, that before you do anything, you need to think it through one more time, just to be sure. One more time becomes the only time you ever operate, and you stop trusting yourself completely. Here's the part I want to name that doesn't get named enough. Overthinking feels productive. That's the trap. That's why it's so hard to stop. When you're running every scenario, when you're analyzing every angle, when you're preparing responses to conversations that haven't happened yet, it feels like you're doing something, like you're being responsible, thorough, like you're the kind of person who thinks things through instead of just reacting. But there's a difference between thinking something through and thinking it to death. Thinking something through has an endpoint. You gather the information, you consider the options, you make a call. Overthinking has no endpoint. It circles, it loops back. It generates new questions every time it answers one. It is thinking that has gotten detached from any useful destination and is now just running, because running is what it does. You're not solving anything, you're just spinning. And the spinning feels like work, so you keep doing it, and meanwhile the actual thing, the decision, the conversation, the moment either passes or gets worse because you waited too long inside your own head to address it. And that's the cost. You prepare endlessly for a life you're not actually living. I want to talk about relationships specifically because I think that's where overthinking does its cruelest work. You meet someone, or you're already with someone, and something small happens. A text that's slightly shorter than usual, a tone that's slightly different, a moment where they seem somewhere else, something that a non-overthinking brain would register and file under. Probably nothing. Your brain does not file it under probably nothing. Your brain picks it up and immediately starts building. What did that mean? Why was it different? Is something wrong? Did I do something? Are they pulling away? Is this the beginning of the end? And within 20 minutes you have constructed an entire narrative, detailed, internally consistent, emotionally devastating, about something that was probably just them being tired. And now you're responding to that narrative instead of to reality. You're quieter with them because of the story your brain wrote. You're more careful, more guarded, slightly more distant, and they notice, and of course they notice, and they adjust to your adjustment. And now there actually is a slight distance between you. Not because anything was wrong, because your brain made something out of nothing and you responded to the something and created a version of the nothing that is now real. You worried the thing into existence. That happens more than you think. The distance you're always afraid of, the one you're constantly scanning for, sometimes you're the one creating it, not intentionally, not consciously, just by living inside the story your brain built instead of the reality that was actually there. There's something I want to say about the specific exhaustion of being an overthinker in a relationship with someone who isn't, because the gap between those two processing styles is genuinely one of the hardest things to bridge. You bring something up gently, carefully after having thought about how to phrase it for 3 days, and they look at you and say something like, "I don't know, I wasn't really thinking anything by it," and they mean it. They genuinely weren't thinking anything by it. It was just a thing they said or did, and they've already moved on and they have no idea you've been carrying the weight of it for 72 hours. And you don't know whether to feel relieved or more anxious, because if they weren't thinking anything by it, then all of that was in your head. And if all of that was in your head, how much other stuff is in your head? And if you can't tell the difference between real signals and fabricated ones, how do you ever trust your own read on anything? So the conversation you tried to have to get clarity ends up producing more questions than it answered, and the cycle starts again. That's not a communication problem. That's not a compatibility problem. That's overthinking making a relationship harder than it needs to be by introducing a third party into every interaction, the version of the other person that exists in your head, running their lines in the scenarios you've scripted, behaving in the ways your anxiety has assigned them. That third party is not real, but they take up a lot of space. Let me talk about where this comes from. Not in a blame your childhood way, though honestly sometimes it is partly that, but in the way that's useful. The way that helps you understand the mechanism so you can start to work with it instead of just being run by it. Overthinking is almost always rooted in one of two things, sometimes both at once. The first is a history of things going wrong in ways you didn't see coming. If you've been blindsided before, hurt in a way you didn't anticipate, by someone you trusted, in a situation you thought was safe, your brain learns a lesson. The lesson is you didn't see it coming last time and it cost you. So this time you will see it coming. This time you will watch for it. This time you will be ready. And your brain takes that lesson seriously. It starts scanning constantly for anything that could be an early signal, for any pattern that resembles the one that came before the hurt. It gets very good at finding those patterns, partly because they're real sometimes, and partly because if you look hard enough at anything, you can make it resemble almost any pattern you're searching for. The second root is a low-grade belief that things won't work out for you specifically, that good things are fragile and temporary and will be taken away, that you are, in some fundamental way, more likely to lose what you love than to keep it. And so the overthinking is partly preparation. If you can anticipate the loss, you can brace for it. You can be ready, and partly a way of maintaining a small amount of control in situations where you feel fundamentally out of control. Neither of those roots make you broken. They make you someone who learned to protect themselves in the only way that made sense at the time. The problem is that protection has outlasted the thing it was protecting against, and now it's protecting you from things that aren't actually threatening. And the protection itself is the thing doing the damage. I want to talk about what overthinking does to your sense of self, because I think this is the part that goes most unacknowledged and does the deepest damage. When you overthink long enough, And when you spend enough time living inside hypothetical versions of events rather than actual ones, you start to lose the thread of who you actually are underneath all the analysis. Because overthinking requires you to constantly model other people, to simulate how they see you, what they think of you, how they're interpreting your words and actions. And the more you do that, the more your sense of yourself becomes contingent on those simulations. You start to know yourself primarily through the imagined eyes of other people. Your self-image becomes a composite of all the ways you've imagined being perceived. That's not a self, that's a performance with no audience. And the real you, the one with instincts and preferences and reactions that don't need to be analyzed before they're allowed to exist, that person gets quieter and quieter the longer the machine runs. Because every time a feeling or an instinct arises, the overthinking brain immediately intercepts it, runs it through the filter, asks whether it's appropriate, whether it's too much, whether expressing it will cause a problem. And most of the time, the feeling gets managed instead of felt, processed instead of expressed, filed away instead of lived. You become someone who is very good at understanding emotions and very unpracticed at actually having them in real time. That's a loss, a quiet, accumulating, significant loss. Here's what nobody tells you about trying to stop overthinking. You cannot think your way out of overthinking. I know how obvious that sounds. I know. But it's genuinely the trap that most people fall into. You start overthinking about why you overthink. You analyze your patterns, you construct frameworks for understanding your anxiety, you research it, you journal about it, you build elaborate systems for catching yourself in the act. And all of that is more thinking, more spinning. You've just redirected the machine at itself and called it progress. The actual movement happens somewhere other than your head. It happens in your body, in learning to notice when you've left the present moment, and practicing the physical act of returning to it. It happens in action, and making the small decision without running it through the full analysis, and finding out that the sky doesn't fall, and slowly building evidence that your instincts are actually okay. It happens in relationships and telling someone what's happening inside you instead of managing it alone, and finding out that being known doesn't destroy things the way you were afraid it would. It happens slowly, non-linearly, with setbacks that feel like starting over but aren't. And it requires you to do the thing that overthinking was always trying to prevent. Be uncertain. Be in something without knowing how it ends. Be present in a moment without having already lived 6 versions of it in your head. That is genuinely terrifying if you are someone who has been using certainty, even imaginary certainty, as a survival tool. But the alternative is staying in the machine, and the machine is running you into the ground. I want to say something directly to the version of you that is reading this at whatever hour this is, probably not sleeping. Probably turning something over that started as a small thing 3 hours ago and has since become a fully constructed crisis. You are not crazy. You are not broken. You are not fundamentally unable to have peace. You are someone whose brain learned to be very, very busy, and busy kept you safe once. And now busy is just busy. It's not keeping you safe. It's keeping you from resting, from connecting, from being in your own life without the constant background noise of what if and what does it mean and what's going to happen. The thought you're carrying right now, the one that feels urgent, the one that feels like if you just think about it a little longer, you'll finally land on the answer that makes it okay. That thought is lying to you. The answer isn't in more thinking. The answer is in putting it down long enough to find out that the world didn't end when you stopped holding it. You were allowed to rest. Now you've figured it all out. Now, before the resolution, before the certainty, before you've run every scenario to its conclusion. Now, in the middle of not knowing, that's the only place rest is ever actually available. Overthinking is killing you slowly, stealing your sleep, your presence, your relationships, your trust in yourself, your ability to just be somewhere without immediately trying to understand and analyze and prepare for what being there might mean. You know this. You've known this. The problem was never that you didn't understand the damage. The problem is that stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. But you've been doing this long enough now to know that the danger isn't out there. It was never really out there. It was always in here. In the machine, in the loop, in the version of events your brain constructed and then handed you to live inside of. The real thing, your actual life, the people actually in it, the moments actually happening, that's been waiting for you this whole time, just on the other side of the noise. All you have to do is let the noise get a little quieter. Not gone, just quieter. That's enough. That's all it takes to start. You know what hurts the most? It's not being rejected, it's realizing the person you care about never felt the same way to begin with. Not in the way you did. Not in the way you hoped they did. And the worst part is, you didn't realize it right away. Because at first everything felt real. The conversations felt natural, the laughs felt genuine, the late night talks felt personal. There were moments where it seemed like something deeper was building between you. little moments that made you believe this could actually turn into something. And when you start believing that, your heart slowly gets involved. Not all at once, but piece by piece. You start paying more attention to them. You notice the way their voice changes when they're excited, the way they talk about the things they care about, the way their mood shifts when something's bothering them. You start remembering small details about them without even trying, things they mentioned once in passing, their favorite music, their favorite food, the stories about their past, and without realizing it, they begin taking up more space in your mind. You think about them when something funny happens. You think about them when you hear a song they would like. You think about them when something reminds you of a conversation you once had. That's how feelings grow, quietly, naturally, without asking permission. But somewhere along the way, something starts to feel different, not wrong, just uneven. You notice that you're always the one starting conversations. You're the one asking questions, the one keeping things going, the one making the effort to stay connected. They still respond. They still talk to you. They still laugh and joke like everything is normal. But something about it feels lighter for them, like they're enjoying the moment, but not investing in it the same way you are. And you try not to think too much about it, because you don't want to ruin what you have. You tell yourself you're overthinking. You tell yourself they might just be busy or distracted, or maybe just not good at expressing their feelings. So you keep showing up, you keep being patient, you keep being kind. Because part of you believes that if you're consistent enough, if you're supportive enough, if you care enough, maybe one day something will change. Maybe one day they'll look at you differently. Maybe one day they'll realize you were there all along. Maybe one day the feeling will finally grow on their side too. But deep down, there's a quiet fear you try not to face. A small voice that keeps asking the same question. What if they never feel the same way? And that thought is something your heart isn't ready to accept yet. Title: She Doesn't Feel the Same Way. Part 2. The hardest part isn't the moment you realize she doesn't feel the same way. It's everything that happens before that moment. The waiting, the hoping, the convincing yourself that maybe you just need to give it more time. Because feelings don't always grow instantly, right? Sometimes people just need space. Sometimes they need to see your consistency. Sometimes they need to realize what's right in front of them. At least that's what you keep telling yourself. So you keep showing up. You keep answering her messages. You keep making time for her even when your day is busy. You listen when she talks about her problems. You support her when she's stressed. You try to be the person she can always rely on, the person who understands her, the person who stays. And slowly, you start building this idea in your head, not just about who she is, but about who the two of you could be together. You imagine simple things, conversations that haven't happened yet, moments that might happen someday, little scenarios where everything finally clicks into place. And those thoughts feel good. They make the waiting feel worth it. They make the uncertainty easier to ignore. Because as long as there's still a possibility, you don't have to let go of the hope. But reality has a quiet way of revealing itself. Not all at once, not with some dramatic moment, just small things that slowly start adding up. Like the way she talks about someone else, not realizing how it lands when she says it, or how she mentions a guy she finds attractive, like it's just normal conversation, like it wouldn't affect you, or the way she disappears for hours, sometimes days, then comes back like nothing happened. And you're just happy she replied at all. Even if the message is short, even if the effort feels minimal, you start noticing the imbalance, but you don't want to believe it means something, because admitting the truth would mean facing a reality you've been avoiding, that maybe you care more than she ever will, that maybe you've been building something in your mind that she never intended to build with you. And the worst part is, she didn't lie to you. She didn't promise anything. She didn't say the words that would make you believe she felt the same way. You just filled in the silence yourself. You interpreted the kindness as something deeper, the attention as something meaningful, the connection as something mutual. But kindness isn't always love. Attention isn't always interest. And connection doesn't always mean someone sees you the way you see them. And slowly, the truth starts getting harder to ignore. Not because she suddenly tells you, but because her actions begin saying something your heart can't keep pretending not to hear. She doesn't feel the same way. And the longer you hold on to hope, the heavier that realization becomes. At some point, the truth stops whispering. and it starts becoming impossible to ignore. Not because she finally sits you down and says the words. Most of the time that conversation never even happens. The truth shows up in quieter ways than that. It shows up in patterns, in effort, in the way someone chooses to show up in your life, or the way they don't. You start noticing things you used to overlook. How you're always the one starting the conversation. How if you stop texting first, the silence stretches longer than you expected. Hours, sometimes days, and eventually you break. You send the message anyway, because pretending you don't care feels harder than admitting that you do. You start noticing the energy difference too. How excited you are when she replies, and how normal it seems for her, like your presence in her life is something she can take or leave, not something she's worried about losing. That realization hurts in a very specific way, because you're not asking for everything. You're not asking for grand gestures or dramatic confessions. You're just asking for something simple, to feel chosen. But when someone truly wants you, you don't have to beg for that feeling. You don't have to analyze every message. You don't have to question whether you matter. It becomes obvious, and that's when the realization finally hits you. Not all at once, but slowly, like a weight settling on your chest. She doesn't feel the same way. Not in the way you hoped. Not in the way you needed. Maybe she likes you. Maybe she enjoys talking to you. Maybe she appreciates having you around. But there's a difference between appreciating someone and wanting to build something with them. And you start asking yourself questions you were too afraid to ask before. Was I just convenient? Was I just someone who was always there when she needed attention? Was I just filling space in her life while she waited for someone else? Those thoughts sting. But the deeper pain isn't even about her, it's about what you did to yourself while hoping things would change. How long you ignored your own feelings. How long you accepted less than you deserved. How long you told yourself to be patient, when patience wasn't the solution. Because love doesn't grow out of one person trying harder. Love doesn't appear just because you stayed long enough. Love isn't something you can earn by proving your loyalty, and realizing that forces you to face a difficult truth. You can't make someone feel something they don't, no matter how good you are to them, no matter how much you care, no matter how much you wish it were different. And once that truth settles in, you're left with a choice, one that hurts either way. Keep holding on to someone who never chose you, or finally let go, even though part of you still wishes she would. Because the hardest thing about loving someone who doesn't feel the same way isn't losing them, it's accepting that you were never really theirs to begin with. At first, letting go doesn't feel like strength, it feels like defeat, like you're walking away from something that could have worked. If only things were slightly different. If only she saw you the way you saw her. If only she realized how much you cared. If only timing was better. If only you had said the right thing at the right moment. Your mind keeps replaying those what ifs over and over again, because your heart would rather believe in a small chance than accept a painful truth. But eventually something starts to shift inside you. Not dramatically, not overnight, just slowly. You start noticing how tired you are. Tired of hoping, tired of waiting, tired of checking your phone for a message that may or may not come, tired of feeling like your happiness depends on someone else's attention. And that's when a different kind of realization hits you, one that hurts, but also frees you. You didn't lose her because you never had her. What you lost was the version of her you created in your mind, the version that loved you back, the version that chose you, the version that saw your worth the same way you saw hers. But that version never actually existed. It was just hope, and hope can be beautiful, but when it's built on the wrong person, it slowly becomes something painful. You start seeing things more clearly, how much effort you gave, how much patience you showed, how much of yourself you poured into someone who never asked for it. And instead of feeling embarrassed about that, you begin to understand something important. There's nothing wrong with loving deeply. There's nothing wrong with caring. There's nothing wrong with believing in someone. The only mistake is giving all of that to someone who was never willing to meet you halfway. And the truth is, one day you're going to meet someone who does. Someone who doesn't make you question where you stand. Someone who doesn't make you guess how they feel. Someone who doesn't make you feel like loving them is a risk. Because when someone truly wants you, you won't have to convince them. You won't have to compete for their attention. You won't have to sit there wondering if you're enough. They'll show you clearly, consistently, without confusion. And when that happens, you'll look back at this version of yourself, the one who stayed too long, the one who hoped too hard, the one who loved someone who couldn't love him back. And instead of feeling regret, you'll feel something else. Gratitude, because that experience didn't break you, it taught you. It taught you what love shouldn't feel like. And most importantly, it taught you that the right person will never leave you wondering why they don't feel the same way. Because when someone truly loves you, you'll never have to ask that question again. This one is going to be uncomfortable, not because I'm going to be cruel about it, not because I think you're a bad person or that you deserve to hurt more than you already do, but because I think you've been telling yourself a story about what happened. A very comfortable, very sympathetic, very well-constructed story. And I think that story is costing you more than the heartbreak itself. And I'd rather say the hard thing than watch you carry a version of events that keeps you stuck. So, here it is. Some of what happened was your fault. Not all of it, maybe not even most of it, but some of it. A real, significant, honest sum. And you know that. Somewhere underneath the narrative you've been running, underneath the anger and the grief and the very reasonable pain, you know that you had a hand in this. You know there were things you did or didn't do, patterns you ran, moments where you chose the comfortable thing over the right thing, and that those choices contributed to the ending. And instead of sitting with that, you've been covering it, building a story around the parts that make you the injured party, collecting evidence for the version where this was done to you, not participated in by you. I understand why. I really do. Grief is hard enough without also having to hold accountability for it. When something ends and it hurts this much, the last thing you want to do is look at your own role in the wreckage. But the coping, the stories, the justifications, the careful editing of memory, that's not protecting you. That's just delaying the thing that would actually help. Let me tell you what the coping sounds like. Because I think a lot of us do this without fully recognizing it as what it is. It sounds like they were emotionally unavailable. Which may be true, but it doesn't ask the question of why you stayed with someone emotionally unavailable for as long as you did. It doesn't ask what that unavailability was doing for you, whether it let you stay at a safe distance too, whether it meant you never had to be feely seen, whether their unavailability was, on some level, a feature rather than a bug. It sounds like they didn't appreciate me, which may also be true, but it doesn't ask whether you made yourself easy to appreciate, whether you communicated what you needed clearly, whether you showed up as the full version of yourself or a managed, careful version designed to be likable, whether you were actually present in the relationship or just there. It sounds like I gave everything and got nothing back. And I want to be careful here because sometimes this is just true, full stop, and you really were in something that took without returning. But sometimes, I gave everything as covering for something else. Sometimes giving everything is a way of controlling the dynamic. Sometimes the constant giving is designed unconsciously to put the other person in debt, to make leaving harder for them, to build a case in advance for why you're the good one if this falls apart. Giving can be generous. Giving can also be a strategy, and only you know which one it was. It sounds like they changed, but people don't usually change in a vacuum. Relationships change people. Your behavior in the relationship changes people. The environment you two created together changes both of you. When someone becomes distant or cold or checked out, it's worth asking, genuinely, honestly asking, what the environment was like. What was it like to be with you when things were hard? What they were responding to. I'm not saying it was your fault they changed. I'm saying change doesn't happen in isolation, and the story that casts you as the passive witness to someone else's transformation is probably missing some of your own. Here's the thing about the comfortable story. The one where you're the one who tried and they're the one who failed. The one where the ending is their fault and your pain is entirely undeserved and there's nothing to examine on your end. That story feels better in the short term. Of course it does. It protects you from the really uncomfortable work of looking at yourself clearly. It lets you stay in the grief without having to complicate it with accountability. It lets you be sad without also having to be honest. But it has a cost, a specific, measurable cost. The cost is that you take nothing from this into the next thing. You exit this relationship with the same patterns, the same blind spots, the same tendencies that contributed to the ending. Because you never looked at them, you never identified them, you never held them up to the light and said, This is a me thing, this is something I do, this needs to change, and then you do it again. Different person, same dynamic, different face on the same shape of relationship, and it ends the same way. And you tell the same story again, and the story protects you again, and you take nothing again. That loop is why some people go their entire lives in relationships that follow the same pattern and never understand why. Not because they're unlucky, because they're very good at being the protagonist of a story that never asks them to grow. I want to be specific about some of the things we do, the actual behaviors, because I think naming them is more useful than speaking in abstractions. We go cold when we should go honest. Something bothers us and something real and something worth addressing, and instead of saying it clearly, we pull back. We get quieter. We create distance. We let the temperature in the room drop and wait for the other person to notice and ask. And when they don't ask, or when they ask wrong or not enough or in the wrong tone, we take that as evidence that they don't care. When really what happened is we asked them to read our minds and they failed a test they didn't know they were taking. We punish in small ways. We're less warm after a fight. We remember and bring it up later. We keep score and then act like we're not keeping score. We do the thing where we say, "I'm fine," while very clearly not being fine, and then resent them for believing us. We pick the wrong moments to be honest and then wonder why honesty doesn't go well. We drop something heavy right when they're stressed or exhausted or in the middle of something. And when the conversation doesn't go the way we needed, we add it to the list of evidence that they can't handle us, that they don't prioritize our feelings, that they're not equipped for this relationship. We confuse intimacy with intensity. We think fighting means we care. We think drama means depth. We manufacture urgency in relationships that are actually healthy and stable because health and stability feel boring, feel unfamiliar, feel like the absence of passion rather than the presence of something real. We love loudly in the beginning and quietly disappear as it gets more real. We're incredibly present and attentive in the early phase, and then once we feel secure, we coast. We stop putting in the effort that got us here because we think arrival means the work is done. It doesn't. Arrival is when the work starts. We make the other person responsible for our emotional state. When we're happy, it's because of them, and we tell them so. But when we're anxious or insecure or struggling, that's also because of them. Their behavior, their distance, something they did or didn't do. We make them the weather of our inner life and then resent them for not always being sunny. We leave before we leave. We check out emotionally while still physically present. We stop investing in the thing months before it technically ends, and then when it ends, we act like we were fully in it right up to the last moment. We weren't. We'd already started protecting ourselves from a loss we were quietly engineering. Any of that land. Here's what I think is actually underneath the coping, because I don't think it's dishonesty. Exactly. I don't think most people sit down and consciously decide to distort what happened. I think it's fear. Specifically the fear that if you look at your role clearly, if you actually account for your part of the wreckage, you'll find something unfixable, something fundamentally wrong with you, some evidence that you are, at your core, the kind of person who ruins things, who doesn't know how to love correctly, who is too much or not enough or broken in some way that won't yield to effort. That's the fear underneath the story. The story protects you from having to find out if that fear is true. But here's what I want you to hear. Actually hear it. Looking at your part in something doesn't mean confirming your worst fears about yourself. It just means looking at behaviors, patterns, choices, things you did in specific moments for specific reasons that you can understand and, if you choose to, change. You are not your worst moments in a relationship. You are also not separate from them. They're data. They tell you something about where you were, what you needed, how you were operating, and that information is genuinely useful if you let yourself have it. The fear says if I look honestly, I'll find out I'm irredeemable. The truth is, if you look honestly, you'll find out you're human, imperfect and patterned, and sometimes self-protective in ways that hurt other people, just like every person who has ever been in a relationship. That's not a verdict, that's a starting point. Let me talk about what accountability actually looks like, because I think people avoid it partly because they imagine it as this punishing, self-flagellating thing, like looking honestly at yourself means spending months in a shame spiral, rehashing everything you did wrong, deciding you're terrible. That's not accountability, that's just shame with better lighting. Real accountability is quieter than that. It It looks more like sitting down at some point when the sharpest grief has passed and asking yourself some honest questions, not rhetorical ones designed to confirm a narrative, actual ones. What did I do in this relationship that I wouldn't want someone to do to me? Not the obvious stuff, not the big fights or the bad days. The small, consistent stuff. The daily texture of how I showed up. What did I know was wrong and keep doing anyway? What did I avoid saying because saying it would have required me to change something I wasn't ready to change? Where was I unfair? Not just in the moments I already know about, the ones I've been editing out of the version I tell people. What did this person need from me that I wasn't willing to give? And was it actually something I couldn't give, or just something I chose not to? Those questions are hard. They're supposed to be hard. But they're also genuinely useful in a way that no amount of righteous anger about what they did to you ever will be, because the answers to those questions travel with you. They're portable. They go into the next relationship and make you better at it. They turn heartbreak into something that costs you once instead of costing you every time. There's one more thing I want to name before we get to the other side of this, and it's the one that's hardest to say because it implicates something we don't like to look at. Sometimes the coping isn't just about protecting yourself from accountability. Sometimes it's about protecting your image of yourself as a good person, as someone who loves well, as someone who, when relationships end, can look back and genuinely say, I tried, I was present, I gave it everything. That image matters to a lot of us, more than we admit. We want to be the person who loved honestly and got hurt anyway, not the person who contributed to their own heartbreak through avoidable choices. We want to be the protagonist of a love story, not the cautionary tale. And so we protect the image. We curate the memory. We tell the story to friends in a way that quietly omits the parts where we weren't our best selves. And slowly, through repetition, we start to believe the curated version. It becomes the real one. The messy, complicated actual version gets buried under the one that makes us look okay. But you can't grow from a version of yourself that you've cleaned up for public consumption. You grow from the real one, the one that includes the moments you're not proud of, the one that captures not just what happened, but how you made people feel, the one that honestly accounts for what you brought into the room, the insecurity, the patterns, the defense mechanisms, the ways you protected yourself that accidentally hurt someone else. And that version isn't shameful, it's just true. And truth is the only thing you can actually work with. I want to say something about the grief, because I don't want this to feel like I'm dismissing it. Your pain is real. Whatever happened, however complicated your role in it, the loss is real and the hurt is real, and you are allowed to feel all of it without having to earn it through perfect behavior. You don't have to have been blameless to deserve to grieve. The grief and the accountability can exist at the same time. In fact, I think that's the only way to actually heal from something like this, not choosing between feeling it and examining it, but doing both. Letting yourself hurt fully while also slowly, with compassion for yourself, looking at what's yours to own. Because the coping and the comfortable story, the edited version, it doesn't actually protect you from the pain. It just reroutes it. You still feel it, you still carry it. You just carry it alongside a story that keeps you from understanding it. And understanding it is what lets you put it down eventually. Not the story, the actual thing. The real account of what happened, your role in theirs, what was real and what was projected, what was love and what was fear wearing love's clothes. That understanding is the only version of this that leads somewhere. This story just leads back to the same place. So stop coping, or start slowly to stop. Not all at once, not by burning down every comforting thing you've been telling yourself in the one brutal session of self-examination. That's not useful either. Just start making room. Start allowing the possibility that the story you've been telling isn't the whole story. Start letting the questions in, not to punish yourself, but because you are curious about yourself and you deserve to know yourself accurately. Start being as honest with yourself about your own behavior as you are about theirs. Because here's what's true. The heartbreak you're carrying right now and the real weight of it, the part that won't quite heal, I don't think it's only about them. I think some of it is about you. About things you did that you wish you'd done differently, about the person you were in this relationship that you don't fully want to be. You know that, you've known it, you've just been covering it with everything else because sitting with it is hard and sitting with it feels like losing. But it's not losing, it's the beginning of actually getting somewhere. The pain doesn't go away when you stop coping, but it changes shape. It becomes something you can hold and look at and learn from instead of something that just lives in you without meaning. And meaning is the only thing that makes any of this worth what it cost. You already paid. You might as well take what you bought. I want to be clear about something up front. This isn't a sad story. Or it is, in parts. But it's not the kind where I'm sitting in a dim room telling you about all the ways love failed me and how I gave up. That's not what this is. That's not why I'm here. I am here because I made a choice. An actual, deliberate, eyes-open choice. And I think that choice is one of the more honest things I've ever done for myself. And I also think most people won't understand it until they've been where I've been. So let me try to explain it. The first thing you need to know is that I wasn't always like this. There was a version of me, not that long ago honestly, who was completely all in on the whole thing. The relationship, the partnership, the building a life with someone project. I believed in it. Not in a naive way, not in a Disney movie way, but in the way a person believes in something they've thought seriously about and decided is worth pursuing. I wanted the person who knew my coffee order without asking. I wanted someone to text when something small but funny happened. I wanted the Sunday mornings and the inside jokes and the specific kind of comfort that only comes from being truly known by another person over time. I wanted all of it, genuinely, for years. And I went looking for it, over and over again, with real effort, real openness, real willingness to be vulnerable and present, and all the things the books and the podcasts tell you to be, and I kept coming back empty. Not devastated, just empty. Like I'd gone to the well expecting water and found it dry again, and had to walk back the same long road carrying nothing. After enough trips, I stopped going to the well. That's not giving up, that's pattern recognition. Here's what the pattern looked like, because I think this part matters. Every relationship I was in, or almost in, or orbiting around, had the same shape to it. Not the same people, not the same details, but the same underlying geometry. I would show up fully. That was just how I did it. I don't know how to be half in something. Never learned. When I was there, I was completely there, present, invested, paying attention, caring about the small stuff, because the small stuff is where people actually live, and for a while that energy would get matched. The beginning always felt mutual. There was something real there. I wasn't imagining it. The connection was genuine, the warmth was genuine, the feeling that this might actually be the thing was genuine. And then, slowly, something would shift. Not a dramatic shift, not a fight or a betrayal or a definitive turning point, just a gradual, almost imperceptible drift toward a symmetry, where I was still all the way in, and they had quietly moved to something closer to halfway. And I would notice it and not say anything because I didn't want to be the person who was keeping score. And I would adjust my expectations down a little, and I would fill in the gaps with generous interpretations, and I would keep going until I couldn't, and then it would end. Either because I finally said something, or they finally left, or it just quietly died from the weight of its own imbalance, and I would be the one sitting with the full grief of it while they seemed, from the outside, at least, more or less fine. That happened enough times that I had to ask myself a serious question. Is this bad luck? Or is this me? And the answer, the honest one, the one I had to sit with for a long time before I could say it clearly, was both. Some of it was bad luck. Some of it was timing, incompatibility, the simple fact that most relationships don't work out, and that's not a reflection of anyone's worth. But some of it was me, specifically a version of me that I had been dragging into every relationship without fully examining it. I was choosing people who needed to be convinced, not in a dramatic way, not people who were cruel or checked out completely, but people who were, at their core, slightly ambivalent. People who were kind of available, sort of interested, generally positive, but never quite fully choosing me. People for whom I was a good option, but not the obvious one. And I kept choosing them because I confused the work of convincing someone with the feeling of earning something. Like if I had to work for it, it must be worth something. Like if it came easily, it probably wasn't real. That's a broken piece of logic, and I ran it for years. The love I was chasing was the love that felt like proof that I was worth the effort. Proof that someone who wasn't sure could become sure because of me, because of what I brought, because of who I was when I was fully present. What I actually found every time was people who remained a little unsure, and me, exhausted from the convincing, wondering why it still felt like I was auditioning. You cannot love someone into certainty. I know that now. Certainty about a person is something you either have or you don't. It's not something that gets built through accumulated evidence. But I didn't know it then. I kept trying to build it, and I kept being surprised when the foundation didn't hold. So I stopped. Not dramatically, no announcement, no declaration. I just stopped putting myself in situations that I already knew the shape of. Stopped swiping. Stopped accepting the half invitations from people who were interested in theory, but not in practice. Stopped extending myself toward things I could already tell weren't going to hold. And the first thing I noticed was how much energy I got back. That sounds almost embarrassingly simple, but it's real. The amount of mental and emotional bandwidth that I had been pouring into other people, into decoding their behavior, into managing my own hope, into the constant quiet work of being in something that wasn't quite working. That bandwidth suddenly had nowhere to go, and it came back to me. It's the strangest feeling. Suddenly having access to your own full attention. Suddenly being the primary recipient of your own care. I'd been so focused outward for so long that being focused inward felt almost disorienting at first. Like, what do I actually like? Not what do I like doing with someone else? What do I like alone, for no reason except that it's good for me? I had to relearn that, which is a little embarrassing to admit, but it's true. I want to be careful here, because I think there's a version of this story that slides into something self-congratulatory. Like, I chose myself, I learned to love being alone, now everything is better and I don't need anyone. That's not what I'm saying. That version is a little too clean, and I don't trust it. The truth is, being alone is hard in ways that being in a bad relationship is not. Being in a bad relationship is its own kind of hard. The grief of it, the confusion of it, the way it chips at you, I'm not romanticizing that. But there's a version of the suffering in a relationship that at least has company. You're not okay, but you're not okay with someone. There's another person in the room. Being alone means being not okay by yourself. It means the hard nights are genuinely quiet. It means there's no one to reach for when you wake up and the world feels like too much. It means birthdays and holidays and Sunday afternoons that can feel very wide and very empty if you let them. I feel that. I'm not pretending I don't, but here's the difference. When I was in those half relationships, those asymmetrical things, I felt alone anyway. I felt alone while texting someone. I felt alone at dinner with someone. I felt alone in the middle of a conversation with someone who was technically present but not really there. I felt alone in the specific, suffocating way that only happens when you're with another person who isn't meeting you. That kind of alone is worse than the real kind, because the real kind is honest. It doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. It doesn't make you question yourself. It doesn't ask you to keep pouring into it while it gives you just enough warmth to stay. Alone is just quiet. And quiet I can work with. There's something that started happening after a few months of this that I didn't expect. I started liking myself more. Not in a self-help affirmation way, in a specific practical way. I started noticing things about myself that I genuinely liked, qualities that had always been there, but that I'd been spending so much energy managing in the context of other people that I hadn't fully felt them. My ability to sit with hard things without needing to immediately fix them. The way I think about problems, the strange, specific humor that only really comes out when I'm comfortable, the things I care about that I used to soften or shrink because I wasn't sure they'd land with whoever I was trying to impress. Those things don't need to be approved of when there's no one to approve them. They just are. They're just mine. And I realized, and this is the part that hit me harder than I expected, I realized that for years I had been trying to get other people to validate things about me that I hadn't validated for myself yet. I was looking for them to confirm that I was worth loving before I'd really decided that for myself. That's not a thing another person can do for you. I see that clearly now. You can be loved by a dozen people and still feel worthless if you haven't done the internal work. Love from the outside doesn't fill the inside. It just temporarily covers the gap. I had to do that work. And I could not do it while I was constantly looking outward. Let me tell you about a specific night that I think about sometimes. It was a Saturday, about 4 months into doing this thing deliberately. And I had nothing going on, no plans, no one to meet, no one to check in with, just a whole evening by myself. A few months earlier, that would have felt like failure, like evidence of something wrong with my life. I would have spent half of it anxious, texting people, trying to manufacture some company, telling myself I was fine while quietly being not fine at all. That night I made dinner, took longer than I needed to, listened to music I liked at a volume I liked, ate at my own table in my own time without checking my phone, watched something I'd been meaning to watch for a long time, went to bed when I was actually tired, not because there was nothing else to do, and somewhere in the middle of all of that I realized I was happy. Not in an event way, not because something good had happened, just quietly, steadily happy, content actually, in a way that didn't require anything from anyone, that felt new, that felt important, because I think for most of my adult life I had been treating happiness as a thing that required ingredients, people, plans, someone to share it with, and that night I discovered it could just be a state, a default, something you could arrive at by removing the things that were disrupting it rather than adding more things to try to create it. That was the night I really understood why I'd chosen this. I want to address the thing people say, because there are a few responses you get when you tell someone you're choosing to be alone, and most of them are well-meaning but not quite right. The first one is, you'll change your mind when you meet the right person. Maybe. I'm not ruling it out. I'm not taking a vow. But this statement assumes that the choice to be alone is a temporary state of waiting, like I'm just in a holding pattern until the right flight comes in. And that framing misses the whole point. I'm not waiting. I'm here. I'm actually fully here, in this life, right now. Not as a placeholder until something better comes along. The second one is you're scared of getting hurt. And look, yes, obviously, I'm a person. I've been hurt, and getting hurt is part of the record. But choosing to be alone isn't the same as choosing to be closed. I'm not building walls, I'm building a self that is solid enough that the next time I open up to someone, I'm doing it from a place of wholeness instead of a place of need. There's a difference between protecting yourself out of fear and protecting yourself out of self-respect. One closes everything down and the other just raises the standard. The third one, and this is the one that's hardest to explain, is, but don't you get lonely? Yes, sometimes, of course. But loneliness that comes from being alone is clean, it's honest. It points at a real thing, a real gap, a real human need. And I can sit with it, name it, feel it, and let it pass. That's survivable. That's just being human. The loneliness that comes from being in the wrong relationship and from being with someone and still feeling unseen, unchosen, like a guest in something that should feel like home, that loneliness has no clean edge. You can't point to it. You can't name it without sounding ungrateful. You can't let it pass because the source of it is still right there next to you. And every day you're in it, you're just adding more distance between yourself and the life you actually want. I'll take the honest loneliness every time. I've been thinking lately about what I actually want. Not as a performance of self-awareness, like the real list, the one I'd only tell myself. I want to feel chosen, really chosen. Not tolerated, not convenient, not the best available option for someone who's still looking over their shoulder. Chosen. The way you choose something when you thought about it clearly and you still want it. The way you choose something and then keep choosing it on the days when it's difficult. I want someone who wants to know me. Not the surface, not the job and the opinions and the easy conversation. The actual me. The specific, sometimes difficult, definitely imperfect actual person. I want it to feel mutual. I want to stop being the one who loves more, works more, stays more. I want to be in something that meets me somewhere in the middle and stays there. And I decided, and this is the core of all of this, I decided that I would rather wait for that thing than keep settling for the shapes of it. I would rather be here in my own life, fully present and genuinely okay, than be in something halfway good that slowly costs me myself. That's not lowering my expectations. It's raising them. It's saying it's this specific thing, this particular experience of being really seen and really chosen and really met. That's what I'm holding out for. Not perfection, not the absence of difficulty, just mutuality, just real. And until that's available, I'm here. I'm fine here. I'm more than fine. So that's why I chose to be alone. Not because love failed me, though it did sometimes. Not because I stopped believing in it, because I didn't. Not because I'm scared, though fear is part of everything. Because I finally got honest about what I was actually doing when I kept showing up for things that weren't working. I was filling a space, managing a loneliness, keeping myself busy with the project of someone else so I didn't have to sit with the quieter, harder project of myself. And the quieter, harder project turned out to be the important one. I know who I am now in a way I didn't before. I know what I need, I know what I'm willing to give and what I'm not willing to keep giving to things that take it without returning it. I know the difference between loving someone and needing them to make me feel like I'm okay. That knowledge didn't come from a relationship, it came from the absence of one. From enough quiet to actually hear myself. And when the right person comes, if they come, when they come, I'll be someone worth finding. Not someone still figuring out what they want. Not someone so hungry for connection that they'll take any version of it. Someone whole. Someone who wants it but doesn't need it to survive. Someone who chose themselves first and is now maybe ready to choose someone else. That's the version of this I want. That's what I've been building toward. And it started with choosing to be alone. Will I ever be loved? There's a question some people carry around that they never really say out loud. It doesn't come up in conversations. It's not something you ask your friends. And it's definitely not something you post online. But it sits quietly in the back of your mind. The question is simple. Will I ever be loved? Not liked. Not tolerated. Not someone people talk to when they're bored. Loved. The kind of love where someone chooses you. The kind where they stay. Because if you're being honest with yourself, you've probably watched it happen for everyone else. You see couples walking together, friends getting engaged, people talking about their person like they're the most natural thing in the world. And part of you is happy for them. But another part of you can't help wondering, why has that never happened to me? You've tried before. You've talked to people. You've opened up. You've let yourself believe that maybe this time it could be different. And for a moment, it always feels promising. They laugh at your jokes. They text you first. They tell you they enjoy talking to you. And you start to think maybe this is finally it. Maybe this is the person who's going to stay. But then something always changes. The messages get shorter. The effort starts fading. The energy you once felt from them slowly disappears. Till one day you realize something that hurts more than anything. You cared way more than they did. And after that happens enough times, you stop asking what went wrong with the relationship. You start asking what's wrong with you. You look in the mirror and start picking yourself apart. Maybe I'm not attractive enough. Maybe I'm too quiet. Maybe I'm too emotional. Maybe I'm just not the type of person someone chooses. And the worst part about that feeling is that nobody around you sees it. To everyone else, you seem normal. You go to work. You talk to people. You laugh when you're supposed to. But inside, there's this quiet loneliness that never really leaves. Because wanting to be loved isn't some dramatic fantasy. It's one of the most human things there is. To have someone who looks at you and thinks, I want this person in my life. Not temporarily, not when it's convenient, but for real. And when you've spent years feeling like that hasn't happened for you yet, that's when the doubt starts creeping in. You start wondering if maybe some people are just meant to watch love happen for everyone else and never experience it themselves. After a while, the question doesn't just stay in the back of your mind. It starts showing up everywhere. You'll be scrolling through your phone and see someone you went to school with, posting pictures with their partner, smiling, laughing, looking like they found something real. And you pause for a second, not because you're jealous in a hateful way, but because you can't help thinking, how did they figure it out? How did they find someone who chose them? Because from where you're standing, it almost feels like everyone else received instructions for love that you never got. Some people fall into relationships so easily, they meet someone, they click, and suddenly they're building a life together. Meanwhile, you're still sitting there wondering why every connection you try seems to fade before it ever becomes something real. You replay old conversations in your head, moments where you thought things were going well, the way they used to respond quickly, the way they seemed interested in you, the way they said things that made you believe they actually cared, and then you remember the shift, that slow change where their energy started pulling away, the delayed replies, the canceled plans, the feeling that you were the only one trying to keep things alive, until eventually you stopped hearing from them altogether. And what hurts the most about those moments isn't just losing the person, it's realizing how easily they walked away. Like the connection that meant so much to you, it didn't really mean that much to them. That's the part that sticks with you. Because after enough of those experiences, something inside you starts changing. You become more cautious. You hesitate before getting excited about someone new. You stop letting yourself believe things too quickly. Not because you don't want love, but because disappointment starts feeling predictable, and eventually you find yourself doing something you never used to do before. You start preparing for people to leave. Even when someone new enters your life and things feel good, there's this quiet voice in the back of your mind saying, don't get too attached. It probably won't last. So instead of enjoying the moment, you hold part of yourself back. You protect your feelings. You stay guarded. And the strange thing about that kind of loneliness is that it doesn't always happen when you're physically alone. You can be surrounded by people, talking, laughing, living your life. But deep down, there's still this quiet uncertainty, because the question never really disappears. Late at night, when everything gets quiet, it comes back again. Will someone ever truly love me? Not temporarily, not out of convenience, but the kind of love where someone looks at you and decides you're worth staying for. And when you've spent years feeling like you're still waiting for that moment, it's hard not to start wondering if maybe it was never meant for you at all. The hardest part about carrying that question, will I ever be loved, is that eventually it stops sounding like a question. It starts sounding like an answer. After enough disappointments, enough people leaving, enough almost relationships that never become real, something inside you slowly shifts. You stop expecting love, not dramatically, not in some big moment where you say you're done with relationships forever. It's quieter than that. You just stop hoping the same way you used to. When you meet someone new, you don't let yourself imagine a future with them anymore. You don't let your mind wander into those what-if scenarios, because every time you did that in the past, it eventually ended the same way they left. So now you protect yourself. You convince yourself that you don't really need love like other people do. You focus on work, on hobbies, on building a life that doesn't rely on anyone staying. And on the outside, it actually starts to look like you're doing better. You're more independent. You don't chase people anymore. You don't beg for attention. You don't sit around waiting for someone to text you back. But what most people don't see is the quiet sadness that comes with that kind of independence. Because deep down, you never actually stop wanting love. You just stop believing it would happen. There's a difference, and that difference shows up in the smallest moments. Like when you're walking somewhere alone and you see a couple holding hands, or when your friends start talking about their relationships and the little things their partner does for them, or when you're lying in bed at night and the room is completely silent. That's when the thought slips back in again. What if it never happens for me? What if I'm one of those people who's always the friend, always the listener, always the one who's there for everyone else, but never the person someone chooses? Because when you've spent enough time feeling overlooked, it starts changing the way you see yourself. You begin assuming that if someone better walks into their life, they'll choose them instead of you. That if someone more exciting shows up, you'll be forgotten. So you keep your expectations low. You tell yourself you're fine on your own. But the truth is, there's still a small part of you that wonders what it would feel like to have someone who doesn't hesitate, someone who doesn't disappear when things get complicated, someone who looks at you and doesn't need time to decide. They just know, and maybe the scariest part of all is realizing how badly you still want that, even after everything, even after the doubt, even after convincing yourself you don't need it. That small part of you still hopes that one day someone will walk into your life and prove that all those fears were wrong. But here's something most people don't realize when they ask that question. Will I ever be loved? The problem isn't that you're unlovable. The problem is that when you've been hurt enough times, you start measuring your worth by the people who didn't stay. You start using their choices as proof that you weren't enough, proof that you were easy to leave, proof that maybe love just isn't something meant for you. But those people were never the judges of your value. They were just people who passed through your life. And sometimes people leave not because you lacked something, but because they were never meant to stay long enough to see everything you are. The truth is, love doesn't happen on a schedule. Some people find it early. They meet someone at 18, 20, 22, and it feels like their life just clicked into place. But for a lot of people, it takes longer. Not because they're less worthy, but because the kind of love they're meant to have requires the right person. And the right person isn't someone who hesitates about you. It's not someone who keeps you guessing. It's not someone who makes you question whether you matter. The right person doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much just by wanting to be chosen. They make it clear, effortlessly, And when that kind of love finally shows up, it doesn't feel like chasing. It doesn't feel like proving yourself. It doesn't feel like begging someone to stay. It feels calm, like something that was always supposed to happen just at the right time. So if you've been sitting with that question for a long time, if you've spent nights wondering whether anyone will ever truly choose you, here's the truth you need to hear. The fact that the wrong people left your life doesn't mean the right person never will enter it. It just means your story hasn't reached that chapter yet. And one day, when someone finally walks into your life and stays without hesitation, you'll realize something that used to be impossible to believe. You were never unlovable. You were just waiting for someone who could actually see you,